everyone, my name's Amaris Aloise. I'm an undergraduate at Cal State Fullerton, majoring in anthropology and public administration, and I'm so happy to be presenting my honors thesis titled Prosecuting Gender Bias, the Effects of Attorney Gender on Juror Perceptions. This study aims to highlight the gender biases present against female attorneys that seriously harm their power in the courtroom and ultimately harm their clients. While the number of female attorneys continues to rise, studies as recently as 2018 have indicated that gender biases continue to exist against female attorneys. So it was the goal of this study to determine whether those gender biases are improving or continuing in the same pattern. The focus of this study is based on juror perceptions of attorneys because jurors get the final say, and their decisions are life-altering. Further, an unbiased jury is guaranteed by our 6th and 7th Amendment rights. Thus, to rid juries of any potentially biased jurors, juries are selected through a rigorous process called voir dire, in which attorneys ask jurors a series of questions that determine their ability to render an unbiased decision. So at the end of the day, a jury consists of individuals from a range of different backgrounds who come together for one common goal: to reach an unbiased decision based on facts. But can a jury truly be unbiased? Certainly, processes like voir dire can rid the system of consciously biased individuals. But what about those biases that are unbeknownst to us? Our implicit biases. To fully understand those biases, we need to look at how our society views gender. So how do we think about gender? Most typically, we think about gender in regard to stereotypes, which are the product of the attribution of personality traits to men and women. And our society codes these traits as desirable and unique to each gender. In fact, we become aware of these stereotypical attributes coded as desirable qualities for men and women from a young age. And since we're so young when all of this happens in our brains, gender stereotyping is often the result of implicit bias, which affects our understanding, decision-making, and behavior without us even realizing it. And it really boils down to how we think about the world and what we think of as normal, which can differ from individual to individual and most definitely differs from society to society. But in American society, at least, gender stereotypes exist in the positive and the negative for both sexes. But they exist in important patterns. Let's take a look at some examples. Here is a list of positive, desirable traits for men and women according to surveys done over the past few decades. On the feminine side, emotional, loving, sensitive, tender. And on the masculine side, logical, assertive, rational, strong. Now let's compare it to the negative attributes that we see. In the feminine, we have anxious, naive, over-emotional. And on the masculine side, we have boastful, inconsiderate, ostentatious. Have you noticed any patterns between the two? There are important patterns that we should recognize between feminine qualities in both the negative and positive, and masculine qualities in both the negative and positive. Feminine qualities are products of emotion, while masculine qualities are products of a lack of emotion. Let's think back to the positive feminine attributes that we talked about. We had emotional, loving, sensitive, and tender. These are all very emotional characteristics. And when we look towards the negative attributes, over-emotional, anxious, naive, these are all products of too much emotion. So really what this shows is that stereotypically we think of women as very emotional human beings. who, even in their negative context, their negative attributes are the result of too much of their positive attributes. And when we look towards the masculine qualities in the positive, we have logical, rational, analytical. These are all qualities that we don't typically associate with being emotional. And the same can be said with the negative inferences of, say, inconsiderate. This requires a lack of emotion. But how is gender stereotyping and bias revealed in the courtroom? There have been many studies that focus on the biases that may still pervade the courtroom, many of which focus on gender. For example, a study conducted by Quas et al. In 2002 found that jurors viewed female defendants more leniently than male defendants in child sexual assault cases. However, this study focuses on the biases jurors may form against attorneys, rather than defendants or victims. And this is important because the success of an attorney affects everyone in the case. While both male and female attorneys experience gender stereotyping, male attorneys tend to experience it in a more positive or neutral manner, while female attorneys experience it negatively. And that's what leads female attorneys into a constant double bind that requires a delicate balance between the masculine and the feminine. As is with most things about being a woman, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. Female attorneys are often subject to what is called in the literature as the, quote, bitch concept, which stereotypes that women are aggressive, emotional, and unreasonable. On the other hand, women are also hurt by the, quote, poor little woman concept, wherein a woman is perceived as helpless, subservient, and lacking authority. Women are often caught between these two concepts, as female attorneys are viewed as weak for expressing compassion and abrasive if they're more aggressive. As we know from our previous discussion on stereotypical gender attributes, positive feminine qualities surround emotional expression and a certain degree of vulnerability. Yet when a female attorney expresses these qualities in the courtroom, jurors negatively perceive her. While these negative perceptions may be implicit, they have negative effects for her client because it adversely affects a juror's receptiveness to her argument. Thus, when acting as a trial attorney, women must tread lightly between typical feminine attributes and typical masculine ones. For if she expresses too much of one, she is negatively perceived. On the other hand, when male attorneys express typical masculine attributes like aggression and dominance, they are positively perceived. In some instances, aggression and dominance is even preferred. Women cannot simply use the same tactics as their male counterparts to gain influence and credibility in the courtroom. Instead, there must be that delicate trade-off between being assertive and being what is traditionally viewed as feminine. Consequently, feminine attorneys struggle to maintain a style that demands the same credibility and respect as a male attorney. So men enjoy a presumed superior competence, so much so that a contrast effect occurs when women exhibit competence in what is considered outside the scope of a woman's expertise. The contrast effect results when an observer may perceive a woman's performance and competence as greater than it is because she exhibits expertise in a male-oriented area of the law. Yet, a woman may be perceived as more competent than her male counterpart in areas perceived as a woman's expertise, such as litigation concerning family matters. So gender stereotypes really pervade more than just the argumentation style of the attorney, but also determine their success rates. So what makes an effective attorney? Well, let's take gender out of the question and focus on what is taught to attorneys regardless of gender. Emotional expression is key in effective trial advocacy. No one wants to listen to an attorney who is dull and monotone. So attorneys are advised to use emotional expression to gain credibility with jurors, because a lack of emotional expression could be taken as a lack of confidence in their client or in the case. Particularly, attorneys are advised that an expression of anger is a necessary part of delivering a closing argument. But if we go back to those gender stereotypes that result in positive or negative perceptions, we see that there's a different pattern for women. Remember that emotional expression is typically associated with feminine qualities, while aggression is typically associated with masculine. Now, when a female attorney expresses emotional expression, too much of it, in a trial, she is negatively perceived. And when she expresses aggression, a typical male attribute, she is also negatively perceived. So if the formula to being an effective attorney is emotional expression and aggression, women are left with nothing. But is this really what happens in the courtroom? Well, a 2018 study by Salerno et al. Found that expressions of anger in male attorneys were led to positive inferences, whereas it led to negative ones for female attorneys. That emotional expression used by female attorneys was actually used against them to describe them as shrill and obnoxious and justify the participants' reasoning for not hiring the attorney. Even though there were some negative inferences about aggressive male attorneys, they were generally described in more positive terms that buffered them against penalty. And this is the study that really inspired my own. In my study, participants were asked to complete an online survey following their viewing of a video of a male or female attorney delivering the same closing argument in a mock theft case. In order to familiarize themselves with the case beforehand, participants were given a summary of the facts. And to give you some background about the mock case, I'll go over what the defendant was charged with and some details that may be relevant in our discussion section. And so in this mock case, the defendant was charged with theft from an elder by a caretaker. The defendant was the victim's son, so this does include some family matters. And the closing statement was made in conjunction with attorney Amy Bailey, who helped me writing the closing statement and finding the relevant law to use. Although we had to cut it shorter than a regular closing statement would be, this closing statement was written professionally with the help of attorneys and was the closest that our participants could get to hearing a closing statement from a case like this from a prosecutor. Amy, our female attorney, and Nick, our male attorney, both video recorded themselves delivering the same closing argument in their own styles, and those videos were then randomly distributed to participants who viewed either Amy or Nick's closing argument. They did not view both. After they viewed the video, participants were asked to answer a series of questions on a 5-point Likert scale about how credible, persuasive, and hireable the attorney was. In addition, participants were asked to rate the attorney using a list of negative adjectives and positive ones, which were also randomized. Although participants were given the option of a neutral response, neutral responses tend to not tell us very much about how a participant felt. It's not really a definitive answer that can be used to prove anything. So the results shown here are the percentages of participants who answered in only strongly agree or agree responses and strongly disagree or disagree responses. Because so few of our participants completed the survey, all we can really do here is compare and discuss how those comparisons reflect the studies and literature I've cited throughout this talk. In this results section, we'll be discussing the questions that concern the likelihood of hiring the attorney, their credibility, and persuasiveness, due to their importance in trial advocacy and their relation to attorney effectiveness. Participant observations concerning aggressive and/or passive behavior were also included due to the perceptions of aggressive women versus aggressive men. This also acts as a check on the argument styles of the attorneys. Participant responses to the positive, often masculine adjectives of strong and confident, as well as responses to the negative, often feminine adjectives of over-emotional and shrill, were chosen because of the gender biases associated with the adjectives. So here we can see the differences in percentages between Nick and Amy. For the likelihood of hiring, more participants would have hired Nick than Amy. They also found him more persuasive than Amy. However, something that's interesting is that more participants found Amy credible. Now, if we turn to the aggressive versus passive, we see that 0% of participants found Nick to be aggressive, and 13% found Amy to be aggressive. While this isn't a large percentage, it's still important to note that there is a significant difference if 0% of individuals found Nick to be aggressive, especially since we know that aggressive female attorneys are often viewed more negatively. And if we look towards the passive, more participants found Nick to be passive than they did Amy. Now, looking towards the gender-associated adjectives, in the strong area, we have Amy rating higher than Nick. And in the confident area, we have the same pattern. However, when we look towards the negative adjectives of over-emotional, 42% found Amy to be over-emotional. Now, as far as shrill goes, no participant found Amy or Nick to be shrill. These are all the percentages of participants who completely disagreed. All other responses were neutral or chose not to respond. Now, 44% of participants found that Nick was not shrill at all. 21% found that Amy was not shrill at all. There is a marketable difference between these two that should be considered. When looking towards the objective effectiveness of the attorney, described by likelihood of hiring, credibility, and persuasiveness, a larger percentage of participants found Nick persuasive and would hire him. However, a larger percentage of participants found Amy to be credible. Now, this may be a little confusing as you would want the attorney you hire to be credible. However, this could be explained by the subject matter of the closing statement, which included family matters since the defendant was the victim's son. And as noted previously, women are often found to be more credible in areas of family litigation, so this may explain the discrepancy between the two. When we look towards the gender-biased adjectives of strong, confident, over-emotional, a greater percentage of participants rated Amy as strong and confident, and that may coincide with the greater percentage of participants describing her as over-emotional. Strength and confidence are typical of masculine attributes, and when women express typically masculine attributes, they are often perceived as overly emotional. In addition, a greater percentage of participants viewed Amy as aggressive when compared to Nick, and a lesser percentage of participants viewed Amy as passive when compared to Nick. We know from Salerno et al.'s 2018 study that aggressive female attorneys are more likely to be perceived in a negative manner, to the point that aggression and its negative inferences are often used as justification for not hiring the attorney. While participants were not asked why they would not hire the attorney, it is important to note that a greater percentage of participants would hire Nick when compared to Amy. Now let's talk about the outlier, the responses describing the attorney as shrill. Not a single participant chose an answer within the realm of agreement for both attorneys. That is, no participant agreed that either Nick or Amy was shrill. But when we look towards the full extent of the Likert scale, more participants who viewed Amy's closing statement chose to stay neutral, and a greater percentage of participants who viewed Nick's closing statement chose more decisive responses, such as strongly disagree. Overall, 44% of participants who viewed Nick's closing argument chose to either strongly disagree or disagree that Nick was shrill, while only 21% either strongly disagreed or disagreed that Amy was shrill. So while no participants agreed that Amy was shrill, a lesser percentage disagreed when compared to Nick. In conclusion, despite a greater percentage of participants describing the female attorney in positive adjectives, such as strong, confident, and credible, a lesser percentage of participants would hire her, which speaks to how much gender biases can hurt the success of female attorneys. According to participants, where the female attorney showed strength and confidence, so too did she act in a more over-emotional manner than her male counterpart. These results coincide with general gender theory as well as previous studies conducted concerning gender biases that adversely affect a female attorney's power in the courtroom. Female attorneys who act in a more aggressive manner are also looked at as over-emotional and receive negative stigma, whereas their male counterparts receive positive feedback. Moreover, women who exhibit typical masculine qualities experience negative perceptions from both men and women. Based on the results of this survey, this project has found that female attorneys may experience a greater degree of scrutiny than their male counterparts. Even when described in positive adjectives such as strong, confident, and credible, female attorneys experience harm from the implicit gender biases that attach to themselves to such positive feedback. This concludes my honors presentation. Thank you all for listening. I would like to thank my mentor, Dr. Fiver Ostro, who helped me every step of the way throughout this project and throughout my college career. She really took this project beyond what I imagined it could be, and I'm so thankful for her. I'd like to also thank attorney Amy Bailey, who helped me put together the closing statement used in my study and brought in her colleague Nick Chase to present the closing statement to our research participants. This research could not have been done without you all, so thank you so much.